Well, thank you all. I'm James Terry from Koo Wee Rup in Victoria, an asparagus producer. So my study topic was the economic sustainability of vegetable farming for future generations. On my first slide here I have two photos. One is lettuce harvest in California and the other is the big city lights of Tokyo, and they're two themes that will come across throughout my presentation. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the William Buckland Foundation as my investor to undertake the scholarship, and Nuffield Australia for giving me the opportunity for the last 18 months. So just a little bit about me. I run a 64-hectare asparagus farm just out of Koo Wee Rup, which grows asparagus. It's then packed by Momack Produce, which I'm a partner of, and we sell throughout Asia and the domestic market here in Australia, producing around 3,500 tonnes of asparagus annually. So this is us in an asparagus field. The industry's been a very big adopter of the seasonal worker program, recruiting workers from Vanuatu. And this year there have been around 300 workers come out. And it's been a big driver in the success and viability of our industry over the past 3 to 5 years. And it was a bit of a highlight about all of my travel and visits around the world, watching and seeing how different businesses in developed and undeveloped worlds, in parts of the world, how they manage their staff and where they recruited their workers from. It's a hot topic on any government discussion and with any horticultural business out there. So why did I set about my study topic? What drove me to do it? I'd been speaking with numerous horticultural producers in the vegetable sector throughout Australia, in Queensland, in Victoria, up on the Riverina on the Murray, and they were all saying a similar message to me, that the farm gate price was not increasing over time. They were getting the same price for the last 10 years and their inputs were going up every year. The cost of labour, the cost of fertiliser, they were all increasing every year. So that led me to think, how can we increase the farm gate return? Are Australia good producers? What do global consumers want, and who is our competition? So that led me to travel to the countries there highlighted in blue, namely Chile, Argentina, Ecuador, New Zealand, the west coast of USA. They are a major competition in export markets throughout the Asian region, and I wanted to understand what the best businesses were doing there and what the worst ones were doing, and also understand that the micro, everything beyond the farm gate, other way around, macro everything beyond the farm gate and micro everything within the farm gate challenges facing those producers. I also then travelled extensively throughout Asia to see what the consumers were after, to see whether they were going to drive the producers to be in the future. So I travelled to Japan, China, India, Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong and Taiwan. So throughout my travel to the production regions around the world, in other major vegetable production regions, I found 5 key factors that were common themes throughout my travels. And they were that management structures and business professionalism existed throughout all of the major businesses that were exporting and selling in their domestic markets and doing it well. They also took all export opportunities and they spent a lot of time in export markets developing their produce and also trying to take opportunities in first grade quality areas, second grade quality areas, so they had avenues of export to be able to cover a range of markets depending on what produce they had to export at that particular point in time. They also exhibited very good transparency and knowledge throughout their supply and value chain. They understood every process that was involved and where efficiencies could be gained. They took every post-harvest opportunity out there. They had really good shelf life and cold chain management. They had packaging that enabled longer shelf life, which gave consistency of supply in markets around the world. And they also spent a large amount of money on marketing and spending time in markets to understand what the consumers were after and where they were going to need to be in 5 and 10 years' time. Horticulture produce is quite often perennial, especially with outcropping asparagus, so you need to be able to plan 5 to 10, 15 years in advance. One apple producer in just out of London in England was planning 35 years in advance because that was 2 crops that they were trying to plan to see where they needed to be in the future. So there are a few examples there of businesses that I visited around the world. Foxy Global, you can see it's a very attractive brand and pretty well everyone in the horticultural vegetable industry knows of them. Prize Fruits in Chile, they had really good staff management and they dedicated a lot of time into their human resources and management of their key and packing staff at a shed level. They gave them holidays each year, and the major and the managers from the business, they salary sacrifice to donate towards that holiday each year. Also, Leader Brand in New Zealand, Tanamura and Ansell in the USA, and Ball Brothers in New Zealand. They all exhibited those traits that I've mentioned. So expanding on those 5 points, business and management structures that existed, I have a simple diagram there on the right-hand side of the slide, where by the board, underneath the board, there's the CEO and a CFO of the company, and under that, there are 6 key line managers, and I broke that down into quality, packing, production, sales, marketing, and human resources. And almost the most important, in my view, is that human resources, horticultural businesses, especially vegetable producers that are hand harvesting, require unbelievable management of staff skills, an ability to make people want to work in the wet, in the pouring rain, and still be able to harvest the product to meet the consumer's needs. So I think that there needs to be really good up and down communication between all of those 3 levels. The roles and responsibilities need to be identified, and I think that a lot of vegetable producers throughout Australia can learn a lot from that. That everyone has accountability if they adopt those policies. It may well be that a smaller business may have someone that's in charge of both quality and production, or even 3 things, but they still have accountability on that level. I also think it's important to get external advice. So on a board, whether it be a vegetable producer, they're often fairly stubborn and set in their ways and haven't really changed their marketing or structure or business plan for many years. To get external advice onto a board and even into family discussions, I think is very important. Also, the key businesses that I visited that were doing things very well, they produced product over a range of different growing regions, whereby here in Australia there's very good opportunity to produce product everywhere from Townsville right down through to Victoria or even Tasmania, to be able to extend the length of season, to be able to give continuity of product within a market. I also saw that family and corporate models both work, and that specialists within each area of the company or the business is very important. We visited a fellow in Singapore in our GFP travels, John Baker, and he really stressed the importance to us about specialisation, whereby a grower is a grower, a packer is a packer, and an exporter is an exporter, and that they need to be able to focus rather than the old mentality of a farmer that he's able to do all of those tasks at hand. So moving on to export opportunities, you can see here my graph, it has the red line at the bottom, and that's Australia's vegetable exports over the last 20 years. Above it, the blue section of the graph is the fruit exports from Australia over the last 20 years. And then finally above that is the yellow, is the nut exports from Australia over the last 20 years. So you can see that the vegetable exports have basically been plateaued at $200 to $220 million per annum for the last 20 years. The fruit section is about 500, and there's been some variability there, and that's a lot to do with production and exchange rate. However, if you focus on the nuts and what they've been able to achieve over the last 5 years, with exporting a lot more product, and it's really improved the farm gate return. So I think the vegetable sector can learn a lot from that in the coming years. So it's important when considering export, growers need to consider a price and quality balance. What's going to be the best return for them back at the farm gate level? Should they sacrifice some quality to be able to access a premium market if the price is there? Australia is perfectly located to access the Asian population. The 60% of the world's population live there, and it's the fastest growing continent in the world. Australia is only 1 to 2 hours in front of all of those time zones, so it makes communication very easy for us to be able to communicate with buyers in those markets. Also, it's important to recognise that with one product there can be numerous amounts of SKUs available, and by SKUs I mean, for example, asparagus, whether it be loose pack, whether it's bunched, what size bunch it is, whether it's 400 grams, whether it's 200 grams, the more SKUs you have for your same product give you more selling opportunities. And overall, any export opportunity needs to come back to a simple thing of, will growers make money? So moving on to grower, exporter and importer transparency. So as I touched on before, growers should focus on growing, packers should focus on packing, and so on. There's potential for grower cooperation rather than neighbouring competition on export markets. I witnessed it on the west coast of California. There were around 5 growers all supplying one packing shed, and in that packing shed they were marketing under one label, which meant that at any one time they were able to have consistency in a range of markets in Asia. And I think that the Australian producers can learn a lot from that as an industry, and producers, they could collaborate a lot better than they do at the moment rather than having huge competition for their neighbour over the back fence. I think Australian free trade agreements and market access opportunities, which have been heavily in the government's forefront at the moment, I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. For example, Brussels sprouts to Korea, they've trebled in volume over the last 3 years, and most of that has been as a result of the free trade agreement which is there. And also online sales, especially within the Asian region where the consumer is fast-paced and they're very demanding for what they need, and they're also very time poor. Online sales have a lot of opportunity and will become a big part of the consumer sector in the years to come. So this is a diagram which I took from Trent DePoli, a 2014 Nuffield Scholar. So on the horizontal axis there's primary producer, processor, distributor and retailer. And there on this diagram it has the primary producer having the highest risk and the lowest return, with the retailer having the lowest risk and the highest return. So I think that producers need to push further along that supply chain, or partner with people in the supply chain to access more of that value and limit their risk and get a higher return for their business. So that can happen through vertical integration, it can happen through collaboration, it can happen through a number of ways, but somehow I think the producers need to get further down that value chain. It's another diagram that I have here which clearly exhibits the transparency and the vision and the leadership that needs to exist in the supply chain. So on the far left there's the buyer, on the far right there's the supplier, and in the middle there's the vision and the leadership that needs to exist. Down the bottom I have that there's mutual benefits that are required, that everyone has to have the same strategy and the same mental framework to be able to have this to exist in the future. There also needs to be co-innovation and investment from all partners involved in the process on the supply chain. So moving back now to things at home. So what does all this mean? I'd encourage every producer out there to actually sit back and assess their supply chain, assess where value could be created and where efficiencies can be gained. So if you look at this, the top left at the start of the diagram is asparagus in the field. It then gets harvested into a crate, washed over a grading line, optically sorted for diameter, packed into a wooden box. It's then cooled and ready for dispatch, and there's a quality check before that happens. It's then transported to an airport, loaded onto an aircraft pallet, it gets flown to a country within Asia, and then it's sitting on the retail shelf. This is a very simplified version of the whole supply chain that exists. And in the final step from the plane in Japan to actually being on the retail step, there's quite often, and I think there are a lot of opportunities for producers out there to partner with companies in the inbound country whereby they're able to rebunch or rebrand the product to be exactly what the consumer is after at any one point in time. So typically with the asparagus supply chain, and I think this is where Australian vegetable producers have a lot of opportunity, there are 7 direct flights a day from Melbourne to Singapore, and once you're in Singapore you can access anywhere in Asia. And this process for asparagus happens within 24 to 48 hours. So I think it's pretty easy for a number of other vegetables to access the premium and fresh part of that market, with product arriving not very long after harvest. So post-harvest management, what are the opportunities here for Australian producers? Cold chain management is something we can learn a lot about. Travelling around the world in Chile, you see product that has unbelievable cold chain management. It's not a vegetable, but they're sea freighting cherries from Chile all the way over to China. It's 50 days in transit, and it's unbelievable. They have product that arrives there without any issues and any quality problems at all. So marketing of product, having a dedicated marketing team within your business, or someone that understands what's happening in the country overseas, or even on the domestic market, to really be up to date and have a modern day view about the marketing. As I've touched on, the air and sea freight logistic routes for Australia were very well located geographically to access a huge population that sits just north of us, Even in Indonesia, there are 250 million people there. So shelf life opportunities and what that brings for consistency of supply and repackaging of product in order to extend shelf life, which gives continuity and it gives buyers an ability to market your product in an easier way. Value adding, as I've touched on, and labelling and branding. And I have 4 photos here. The bottom left photo is a melon in Japan being retailed for $135. The second photo along is 3 Tasmanian onions which have been net wrapped in Japan, which is an example of what I was saying before. They've been shipped in bulk and utilised the cheaper labour costs in Japan to be able to retail that product exactly the way the consumers would like it. The next photo is a tray of tomatoes as a gift pack, retailed for $65. And finally, the 4th slide there is an example of a traditional wet market whereby there's no post-harvest treatment, the cold chain management's very poor, there's no value added that's occurred there at all, and there's no way to differentiate Australian product from any other country in the world, and something that I think Australia as a whole and an industry could really push and get a lot of benefit from in the years to come. So consumers and cultures, every country is different. Respect, honesty and integrity are key to making the process and the supply chain work efficiently. Friendships come before business in the Asian region. Spending time there, visiting customers, visiting people, and to learn about the markets, it's pretty apparent to me that work is their life and that all they want to do is work, and that means that they want to be friends with you before they'll do business with you. And that consumers are driving the change in what we need to do back here as a producer. Convenience, quality, health and versatility are what the Asian consumers are after. So on the bottom left photo there is a Taiwanese middle trader. So that is the second process after the asparagus has landed there, and I wanted to learn about what's actually happening in their market. So in summary, time away from the business is positive. Use of management consultants to structure businesses and refocus goals and align for more export in the future, I think, is very important, and as a whole industry I think that there can be a lot of benefits there. Export consistency and branding are vital for success in export markets. Relationships and transparency in the supply chain are going to drive success in the future. The stubborn old farmer mentality or old producer mentality of growing it and just selling it onto the wholesale market or to the supermarkets here in Australia without getting product off the domestic oversupplied market is not sustainable in the future. And also understand the market where you're trying to sell the product into. And my final slide shows that. If you see here, if you look at North America, for example, it shows that 67% of consumers there buy their produce from a supermarket, as opposed to Asia, where only 31% of the population buy their product from a supermarket. So really you need to spend time in the market to learn and understand where the consumers are buying their product. And thank you once again to Nuffield for the opportunity to take on the travel for the last 18 months. It's been an unbelievable experience. Thank you.